She was being held in a chicken coop. So I let her out and gave her my wife's shoes. The sun was fixing to set behind the mesa when I heard the first scream. I'd been working late in the barn, mending harnesses by lamplight, when the sound cut through the evening air like a rusty blade. Sarah had been dead near 6 months now, and I'd grown accustomed to the silence that settled over our little homestead come nightfall. The horses would settle in their stalls, the cattle would find their way to the water trough, and the world would go quiet save for the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. But this wasn't the wind. I set down my tools and stepped outside, straining my ears. The cry came again, high, desperate, and unmistakably human. It was coming from the direction of the Carmichael place, about a quarter-mile east through the scrub brush. Old man Carmichael had died the previous winter, and his property had been sitting empty ever since his good-for-nothing son rode off to California without so much as a backward glance. Or so I'd thought. I fetched my rifle from the rack inside the door and started walking. The evening air was cool against my face, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the distant promise of rain. As I got closer to the abandoned homestead, I could make out the dark silhouettes of the ramshackle buildings against the purple sky. The main house sat with its windows boarded up like closed eyes, but there was something else, a flickering light coming from somewhere behind it. The screaming had stopped, but I could hear voices now. Men's voices, rough and low, punctuated by what sounded like cruel laughter. I crept closer, using the cover of an old wagon and some scattered farm equipment to mask my approach. The light was coming from a lantern hung on a post near what used to be Carmichael's chicken coop. The structure was in better repair than I'd expected. Someone had been using it recently. Through the gaps in the weathered boards I could see the glow from inside and shadows moving around. "Please," a woman's voice called out, clearer now that I was closer. "Please, just let me go. I won't tell anyone, I promise." "Now, Miss Elena," came a man's voice in reply, syrupy with false kindness. "You know we can't do that. You've seen too much, heard too much. Besides, your daddy's got to learn that there are consequences when folks don't pay their debts." Another man laughed. "Hell, Marcus, I say we just take her to Mexico and sell her to one of them brothels down in Sonora. Probably fetch a good price for a pretty señorita like her." "Patience, Tommy. All in due time." I counted at least 3 distinct voices, maybe 4. The rifle in my hands felt solid and reassuring, but I'd never been much of a fighter. I was a farmer, a man who preferred to solve problems with hard work and straight dealing rather than violence. But Sarah had always said I had a good heart, and she'd raised holy hell whenever she saw cruelty to man or beast. What would Sarah do? I wondered. The answer came to me as clear as if she'd whispered it in my ear. "The right thing, Samuel. You know what the right thing is." I made my way around to the back of the coop, where the boards were older and more weathered, pressing my eye to a gap I could see inside. 3 men sat around a makeshift table playing cards, their guns holstered but within easy reach. In the corner, a young Mexican woman sat tied to one of the support posts. Her dark hair was disheveled, her dress torn at the shoulder, and her feet were bare and bleeding. But it was her eyes that struck me most. They burned with a defiance that reminded me powerfully of Sarah when she got her dander up. The men were drinking from a bottle of whiskey and talking among themselves, paying little attention to their prisoner for the moment. I studied them carefully. The one called Marcus appeared to be the leader, a thin man with a stringy beard and cold eyes. Tommy was younger and stockier, with the look of someone who enjoyed causing pain. The third man was older, graying at the temples, but something about his posture suggested he was dangerous despite his age. I'd seen all 3 of them before, though it took me a moment to place them. They'd ridden through town a few weeks back, claiming to be bounty hunters, but Sheriff Morrison had run them out when he caught them cheating at cards in the saloon. They were the sort of men who lived in the spaces between civilization and chaos, taking what they wanted and leaving destruction in their wake. The woman Elena, they'd called her, shifted against her bonds, testing them. Marcus looked up from his cards and grinned. "Don't bother, señorita. Tommy here knows his knots. You ain't getting loose." He took a long pull from the bottle. "Your papa should have thought about you before he decided to cross Jake Morrison." "My father is an honest man," Elena said, her voice steady despite her circumstances. "He would never." "Your father," Marcus interrupted, "owes Mr. Morrison $10,000, money he borrowed to expand that little ranch of his and then couldn't pay back when the cattle prices dropped. Now Mr. Morrison, he's a reasonable man. he was willing to work out terms. But then your papa had to go and talk to the federal marshals about Mr. Morrison's other business interests. Elena's face went pale. He was trying to get Morrison hanged is what he was trying to do. And that's just poor manner. Marcus stood up and walked over to her. So now your papa's going to learn what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. We're going to send him a little message, and you're going to be that message. I'd heard enough. Jake Morrison was a name I knew, a cattle baron who controlled most of the rangeland south of town. There had been rumors for years about his methods, but he had enough money and influence to keep the law looking the other way. If Elena's father had tried to expose Morrison's illegal activities, that would explain why she was here. The problem was, I was one man with one rifle against 3 hardened criminals in a defensible position. I needed to even the odds. I crept away from the coop and made my way to the old house. The back door hung loose on its hinges, and I slipped inside. The place smelled of dust and abandonment, but I knew what I was looking for. Carmichael had been a cautious man, and like many homesteaders, he'd kept certain supplies on hand for emergencies. I found what I needed in the cellar, a small keg of black powder that Carmichael had used for clearing stumps. It was still good as far as I could tell. I also found some old rags and a length of rope. The plan that formed in my mind was simple, dangerous and probably foolish, but it was the only one I could think of that might work. I made my way back to the chicken coop, this time approaching from the side where the men had left their horse. 3 animals stood tethered to a post, stamping occasionally and flicking their ears at flies. I untied them as quietly as I could and gave each a sharp slap on the rump. They bolted into the night, their hoofbeats fading into the distance. That would buy me some time at least. Next I positioned the powder keg against the side wall of the coop, farthest from where Elena was being held. I soaked the rags in coal oil from the men's lantern and arranged them as a fuse. The setup was crude, but it didn't need to be elegant, just effective. I took a position behind the old wagon, rifle ready, and lit the fuse. The explosion when it came was louder than I'd expected. The entire side wall of the chicken coop blew outward in a shower of splinters and dust. Inside I could hear shouting and cursing as the men scrambled to figure out what had happened. What the hell? We're under attack. Get to the horses. I waited until I saw Marcus stumble out through the hole in the wall, then put a bullet in the dirt at his feet. He dove for cover behind a water trough. This is your only warning, I called out. Let the woman go and ride out, and nobody else gets hurt. Go to hell, came the reply, along with a rifle shot that splintered the wagon wheel near my head. The fight that followed was brief, but intense. These men were experienced, but they were also drunk, disoriented, and suddenly found themselves without an exit strategy. Tommy tried to rush my position and caught a bullet in the shoulder that sent him spinning to the ground. The older man attempted to circle around behind me but walked right into the business end of my rifle. Marcus held out the longest, using Elena as a human shield as he backed toward the remains of the coop. But when he realized his horses were gone and his men were down, the fight seemed to go out of him. All right, he called out. All right, you win. But you have no idea what you're getting yourself into. Jake Morrison doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive. That's a problem for another day, I replied. Right now you're going to untie that woman and walk away. Your men need a doctor and you need to be gone before Sheriff Morrison gets here. It was a bluff. The sheriff was 20 miles away in town, and the nearest doctor even farther, but Marcus didn't know that. He cut Elena's bonds with his knife and pushed her away from him. She stumbled but stayed on her feet, her dark eyes finding mine across the smoky clearing. This isn't over, Marcus said as he helped his wounded companions to their feet. No, I agreed. I don't suppose it is. I watched as the 3 men limped away into the darkness, then turned my attention to Elena. She was standing near the ruined wall of the chicken coop, rubbing her wrists where the ropes had chafed them. In the flickering light of the lantern, I could see that she was younger than I'd first thought, maybe 25 or so, with the kind of quiet beauty that spoke of strength, rather than fragility. Ma'am, I said, touching the brim of my hat. Samuel Morrison. Not related to the Jake Morrison they mentioned, I added quickly. Elena Vasquez, she replied, and I owe you my life, Senor Morrison. Just Sam is fine, and you don't owe me anything. I looked down at her bare feet, noting the cuts and bruises. We need to get you some shoes and get you home. Where do you live? My father's ranch is about 15 miles south of here, near the border, but she hesitated, then shook her head. They will be watching for me, and they meant what they said about my father. If I go home now they will hurt him. I considered this. What did your father do exactly? The truth now. Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her. because she straightened her shoulders and met my gaze directly. My father discovered that Jake Morrison has been rustling cattle from the smaller ranchers and selling them across the border. When the ranchers couldn't pay their loans to Morrison's bank, he would foreclose on their land. It is a, how do you say, a circle that feeds itself. A vicious cycle, I supplied. See, exactly. My father gathered evidence, bills of sale, witness statements, photographs. He was going to present it all to the federal marshals next week. Her voice dropped. But someone betrayed him. Morrison's men came to our ranch 3 days ago and took me. They said they would kill me unless my father destroyed the evidence and left the territory. It was an old story with a new twist. Morrison was using his position as both cattle buyer and banker to systematically steal from his neighbors. It was clever in a brutal sort of way and probably legal enough that the local authorities couldn't touch him. But federal marshals were a different matter. Where is this evidence now? I asked. Hidden. My father is no fool. He made copies and gave them to people Morrison doesn't know about. But if they kill me, she shrugged with a fatalism that was probably cultural as much as practical. I made a decision that would change both our lives, though I didn't know it at the time. You're coming home with me, I said. At least for tonight. Tomorrow we can figure out how to get word to your father and the marshals. Elena looked uncertain. I cannot impose. Ma'am, you're bleeding barefoot, and those men could come back with reinforcements. It's not an imposition, it's common sense. She nodded slowly. Gracias, Sam. You are very kind. We walked back to my place in comfortable silence, Elena moving carefully over the rough ground. When we reached my house, I lit the lamps and stirred up the fire in the stove. The place felt strange with another person in it. I'd grown accustomed to the quiet and the solitude, to the way my own footsteps echoed in the empty rooms. Please, sit, I said, gesturing to one of the kitchen chairs. Let me look at those feet. While Elena soaked her feet in a basin of warm water, I went to the bedroom and opened the cedar chest where I kept Sarah's things. I'd been meaning to give them away to the church for months now, but somehow I'd never quite gotten around to it. Her Sunday shoes were on top, good leather, hardly worn, about the right size. I brought them back to the kitchen, along with a clean pair of wool socks. These were my wife's, I said simply. She'd want you to have them. Elena looked up at me with something that might have been surprise. Your wife, where is she? She died last winter. Pneumonia. The words came easier than they used to, though they still carried a weight. I am sorry for your loss, Elena said softly. She took the shoes and socks with obvious reverence. What was her name? Sarah. Sarah Jane Morris. I smiled slightly. She was the strongest person I ever knew, would have shot those men herself if she'd been here tonight. Elena laughed, a sound like water over stones. I think I would have liked her very much. As she put on the socks and shoes, I found myself really looking at her for the first time. She was beautiful, certainly, but it was more than that. There was an intelligence in her eyes, a steadiness that reminded me of Sarah in the best possible way. Not that they looked anything alike, where Sarah had been blonde and blue-eyed, Elena was dark and exotic, but they shared that same core of steel that some women possessed. They fit perfectly, Elena said, standing and taking a few experimental steps. It is as if they were made for me. Sarah would be glad to know they're being put to good use, I said. She never could stand the thought of waste. Elena moved to the window and peered out into the darkness. What do you think they will do now? Morrison's men? Lick their wounds tonight most likely. But they'll be back, either for you or for me or both. We need to get word to the authorities before they can regroup. The nearest federal marshal is in El Paso, Elena said. That is 3 days' ride. Then we'd better get started. I moved to the gun cabinet and began pulling out rifles and ammunition. I've got a good horse, and enough supplies for a week. Question is, are you up for a hard ride? Elena's chin came up. I have been riding since I was 4 years old, senor. I can keep up. I believed. There was something about the way she carried herself that spoke of competence and determination. All right then, we'll leave at first light. With luck we can be in El Paso before Morrison's men even know we're gone. But luck, as it turned out, was not on our side. We were awakened before dawn by the sound of horses, a lot of them approaching the house. I grabbed my rifle and moved to the front window, Elena right beside me. In the gray pre-dawn light I could see at least a dozen riders spread out in a semicircle around the house. Jake Morrison himself sat his horse in the center of the group, a tall man with silver hair and the kind of presence that comes from absolute confidence in one's own power. Samuel Morrison, he called out, I know you're in there and I know you have something that belongs to me. The woman doesn't belong to anyone, I called back. Morrison laughed. Son, you have no idea what you've stepped into. That woman's father has stolen property of mine. documents that could damage my reputation. I want them back, and I want her back. You hand her over and maybe we can work something out, and if I don't, then you'll share her fate. Nothing personal, you understand, just business. Elena touched my arm. Sam, you do not have to do this. Give me a gun and let me fight beside you, but do not die for me. I looked down at her, this brave woman in my dead wife's shoes, and knew that I'd already made my choice back at the chicken coop. Some things were worth fighting for, even dying for. Sarah had taught me that. Ma'am, I said quietly, my wife used to say that a person is judged not by what they take from the world but by what they give back. She gave me 18 good years and taught me the difference between right and wrong. Now it's my turn to give something back. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Morrison, I called out, you want her? Come and take her. The battle that followed was the kind that songs get written about, assuming anyone lives to sing them. Morrison's men had us outnumbered and outgunned, but we had the advantage of position and desperation. Elena proved to be as good with a rifle as she was in the saddle, picking off 2 of Morrison's men in the first few minutes of the fight. The siege lasted most of the day. Morrison's men tried rushing the house twice, but the thick log walls and narrow windows made it a fortress. By afternoon 3 of his men were dead and several more wounded, but our ammunition was running low and it was only a matter of time. That's when we heard the sound of horses approaching from the south, a lot of them moving fast. At first I thought it was reinforcements for Morrison, but then I saw the dust cloud and realized they were coming from the wrong direction. The riders crested the hill in a thunder of hoofbeats and gunfire. At their head rode a man I didn't recognize, but Elena gasped and nearly dropped her rifle. Papa, she cried. Elena's father Miguel Vasquez had brought 30 vaqueros with him, tough Mexican cowboys who knew how to fight. Behind them rode a smaller group of men in federal uniforms. The marshals Elena's father had contacted had come after all. The battle turned quickly after that. Caught between 2 forces, Morrison's men either surrendered or fled. Morrison himself tried to make a run for it, but was brought down by one of the marshals before he'd gotten 100 yards. As the dust settled, Elena ran out to embrace her father, tears streaming down her face. I stood in the doorway watching the reunion and feeling suddenly empty. The excitement was over, the danger past. Soon Elena would go home with her father and I would be alone again. But Elena had other ideas. Papa, she said, turning to look back at me, this is Sam Morrison. He saved my life. Miguel Vasquez was a stocky man with graying hair and intelligent eyes. He studied me for a long moment, then walked over and extended his hand. Senor Morrison, he said in accented but clear English, my daughter has told me what you did. I am forever in your debt. No debt, I replied, shaking his hand. Any decent man would have done the same. Miguel smiled. Perhaps, but not every man would have given his dead wife's shoes to a stranger. Elena looked down at the leather shoes on her feet, then back at me. Papa, I would like to stay here for a while longer, to help Sam rebuild what was damaged in the fighting. Her father's eyebrows rose. Elena, the house needs repairs, she continued, her cheeks coloring slightly, and Sam has been alone for too long. Besides, someone should make sure Morrison's remaining men do not return for revenge. Miguel looked from his daughter to me and back again. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him, because he nodded slowly. Very well, mi wa, but only if Senor Morrison agrees to such an arrangement. Elena turned to me, her dark eyes hopeful but uncertain. Would you like me to stay for a while? I thought about Sarah, about the empty house, and the long quiet evening. I thought about Elena's courage in the chicken coop, her steady hand with a rifle, the way she'd looked in Sarah's shoes as if they'd been made for her. I'd like that very much, I said, and so Elena stayed. At first she slept in the spare room and we maintained the careful politeness of strangers sharing a house, but as the days turned to weeks, something deeper began to grow between us. Elena was nothing like Sarah, where my first wife had been gentle and nurturing. Elena was fierce and independent, but they shared that same core of strength, that same unwavering sense of right and wrong. The rebuilding went slowly but steadily. We repaired the damage from the gunfight, expanded the garden, and even talked about increasing the size of the herd. Elena proved to be as capable with a hammer and saw as she was with a rifle, and her presence brought a life to the house that had been missing since Sarah's death. One evening, about a month after the siege, we were sitting on the front porch watching the sunset when Elena suddenly spoke. Sam, do you think Sarah would have approved of me being here? I considered the question seriously. I think Sarah would have liked you very much, I said finally, and I think she would have wanted me to be happy. Are you happy? I looked at Elena, really looked at her sitting there in Sarah's shoes, her hair loose around her shoulders,
her eyes reflecting the last light of day. Yeah, I said, surprised by how true it was. I think I am. Elena smiled and reached over to take my hand. Good, she said simply. 6 months later, we were married by the circuit preacher, with Miguel Vasquez beaming proudly and half the county in attendance. Elena wore Sarah's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and Sarah's shoes. I'd asked Elena if she wanted new ones for the ceremony, but she'd shaken her head. These shoes brought me to you, she'd said. I'll never take them off. And she never did, at least not for long. Those shoes saw her through our wedding, through the birth of our 3 children, through good times and hard times, through all the long years of our life together. When Elena finally passed at the age of 87, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, she was wearing Sarah's shoes. I buried them with her. It seemed right somehow. 2 good women linked by circumstances and kindness, and a pair of well-made leather shoes. As for Jake Morrison, he was convicted of cattle rustling, fraud and kidnapping. He died in territorial prison 2 years later, though some said it wasn't the law that got him in the end, but his own men tired of following a leader who'd brought them nothing but trouble. The chicken coop still stands, though it's mostly ruins now. Sometimes when I ride past it, which isn't often as I'm 93 and don't get around like I used to, I think about that night when everything changed, about choices and consequences, about the strange ways that fate brings people together. Elena always said I saved her life that night, but I think she had it backwards. The truth is she saved mine. I was drowning in grief and loneliness, going through the motions of living without really being alive. Elena changed all that. She brought laughter back to my house, purpose back to my days, and joy back to my heart. All because I heard a woman screaming in a chicken coop, and decided to do something about it, and because Sarah had good taste in shoes.